All right, so first of all, we want to introduce ourselves. Janet, do you want to take it away?
I will. So I'm Janet Taylor, and I teach in Naperville, which is a western suburb of Chicago. And I teach a lot of different classes, a lot of different courses. I'm kind of the jack of all trades, master of none. And Matt and I used to work together in Chicago Public Schools at Kenwood Academy, where he still works.
Yeah, so I'm still at Kenwood Academy. This is my 10th year. I teach a lot of different things, but mostly drawing. So I do like a level 1 class, but then a bunch of different honors drawing classes and AP drawing portfolio. I also want to give my little Boston shout out. This is the first time I've been here in 10 years because I graduated from BU.
Woo!
So it's very surreal. I got in last night at like midnight, but I had to include a picture from 10 years ago. It was my buddy Andrew right before we left Boston, so it's good to be back. Okay, so we're going to start off just talking about what we mean by a twist, okay? So pretty straightforward. The idea is if there's a lesson idea or a STEM for something in your classroom that maybe feels a little bit traditional or old school, how can we find ways to bring some life into it, to make it fresh and exciting or maybe more contemporary in some way? And the way we want to do that is by making either small or large changes to a number of components of the lesson.
Right, so we could be looking at the prompt, or the way we actually deliver that information. Excuse me.
You be okay? Okay, we're going to do a tweak on this delivery right now. I'm taking over. It might be about the process or the product. And by the way, this is not student work. This is just stolen from the internet, right? But the idea is, if you think of a portrait as something like this, right, how can we manipulate it in some way to be more interesting? Okay? You're right, Janet?
Yeah, my goodness. Okay.
All right. So the goal for today, we're going to try and get through 50 lessons.
Whoa. Yes.
We started with like, we just couldn't take stuff out. So it's going to go real fast, and we apologize in advance. So we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of like how we did this or that. But of course, again, you can email us if there's something that caught your eye and you have questions about the process. So we'll see if we can make it to the end, okay? And again, we're trying to spark a little bit of new life into these lessons as well.
So based on that idea, actually as I've changed schools, I've also changed my philosophical approach to teaching, and I do mostly choice and tab. Are there any of you guys out there? Anybody? No? What? Okay. Anyway, so basically, I just want to put it out there that Matt and I have worked together for a long time, and we've discussed our philosophical approaches, and really feel strongly that there should not be like a this or that dichotomy that's kind of happening in art education trends right now. We see a lot of this kind of judge on one side or the other, and we just kind of feel strongly that there's a place for everything, right? So even in this case, we have our very traditional grid transfer, right? But then also copyrighted imagery, and not necessarily saying that that doesn't have a place for practice, but also there's a lot of different ways that you can deliver the information to work for you in your teaching style.
Okay, so because we have a lot of lessons, we try to generally clump them. So just a quick overview here. These are the themes that we're going to be addressing. Again, if we get to all of them.
So that being said, if you have questions, feel free to ask, but know that we're just kind of straight through.
All right, you guys ready?
Ready.
All right. We're not going to talk fast like an auction or anything. Okay, so we'll start off with observational drawing, which I teach a lot of, and I think there's this impression you're just like drawing your hand, drawing flowers, drawing some boxes, and to be honest, like we still do a lot of that in our class. So I think there is definitely value in that, but we want to think about ways to maybe break the stereotype of that being too teacher-directed or too boring, okay? So first off, contour surgery. A lot of times when we do these quick contour studies, instead of just disposing of them or keeping them in their sketchbook, we cut them out and then do some surgery, replace our hands. In some cases, students can push that further and do full body parts. So it's a good way just to bring life to something that's normally maybe kind of quick and disposable, and also get them a little bit comfortable if they're not super thrilled with their first attempts at contour drawing.
So a great way to kind of incorporate the contour and the observational drawing together is to ask students to bring in family recipes that they've had. It connects them more with their parents and grandparents. And also they bring in then objects and kind of talk about the history of cooking and how that brings us together. So just kind of tweaking that up. And then of course, your stale kind of objects and playing with them, but also using different media, like teaching how to use colored pencils to blend. But then kind of pushing the kids outside their comfort zone and saying that there's other ways to draw with different media that's not traditional like graphite. You can actually just draw with wire.
We are kind of lucky at the school I teach it in Chicago. There's a nice little kind of garden area that's sort of secluded with some a nice array of plant life. So we'll go out there to do some plant studies with observational drawing, but we add the fantastic twist where they have to invent like a fictional properties of these plants, much like the naturalists would go out and sort of study plants when they first discovered new areas. So one thing we do is have them write a description about maybe some of its kind of Harry Potter style powers. We also use a Latin name generator. There's like a bunch of free websites and apps to come up with like a fake Latin name for it, right? So here, the candor flower is found in shaded areas near water. It blooms only when a lie is told, but its nectar only allows one to tell the truth when it's in their system. This is an activity that I love doing. When we think of blind contour, right, it's you don't look at your paper, right? So this is a warm-up exercise. If you haven't seen this, the way it works is you're back-to-back with someone. And this is a situation where Janet might have, I'll give her a simple image on a piece of paper, and I'm back-to-back with her. And the goal is I'm going to draw what she's seeing. And the way that happens is she's describing to me what she's seeing, but you can't use any clues about the object. So if it's a hand, you can't say there's a finger. You're only talking in terms of line. There's a line that moves up and to the right, it's a little bit shorter than the last one. And the idea is it's kind of a metacognitive exercise. When I'm drawing from observation, what she's saying is kind of what I should be thinking, right? We always talk about drawing what you see, not symbolic versions of what you think you see. So I have a little clip to kind of, you can maybe hear them. So of course, for some it's really frustrating. We share ones, that where they matched well or they didn't. But really, of course, it's not about that. It's about that communication and trying to get your brain to think a little bit differently for observational drawing. I also like to bring in digital refinements. So after like a couple days of observational drawing, we don't have like a ton of computers in our room. We have the ones that we do are like 10 years old, but they can still just get through Photoshop for some of the basic techniques. So what I like about contour drawings is when you scan them, it's really easy to digitally remove the white, right? And then you can kind of work with these transparent layers. So sometimes it might be just sort of painting by numbers, like on the bottom or the right. But like the one on the top, those are a bunch of blind contour studies from a sketchbook. And so the artist repeated or duplicated that layer and changed the color and moved them around to, again, bring new life to these sort of warm-up studies.
All right, linear perspective. So I hate teaching linear perspective, I'll be honest. The kids absolutely love it, and we joke about it all the time. But traditionally, we have the road with the buildings on the sides, or sometimes we take them in the classroom, or down the hallway and do lockers, right? So it's kind of a twist of just the theme. Basically, I always try to make something a little bit different because I hate it so much. But I love monsters, right? And you'll see that kind of a repeated theme actually throughout this. But students then have to create their little monster scenes using line weight and linear perspective. I've also had a colleague do like an apocalyptic room and kind of twisting it that way. In the same kind of vein is talking about ground planes and perspective in that way, right? But then also one-point perspective, which is a little bit more maybe harder to see from there. It's not just like a drop shadow, right? It's actually the kids practicing in that way. But these are collaged magazine imagery, and then they have to, they actually stack, right? They're like cardboard with little spacers. So it's hard to see there, but they're really learning about space and size and that kind of thing. But also then this feels a little safer than having to do a whole room for the students, right? Just like a little practice.
Okay, portraiture. So again, moving from just a traditional portrait, looking at a photo, drawing in a pencil, that sort of thing. We have a bunch in this category. Recently, in my Studio Drawing 1 class, we've done interactive portraits where you need to do a little bit of planning for this, but you are inserting yourself into your own drawing with an interaction. We borrowed this kit from our photo class, and I was surprised to find out that whole kit with the lights and the green screen is like under $100. So I want to invest in one for my own classroom. But again, students plan and sketch this out where they're going to make a charcoal drawing, pop themselves in there. So you can kind of see the before and after here. This one's a little tricky. The brain is what she drew in charcoal, and she kind of made those 2 layers, playing with opacity to insert the brain into her head there. This is like a bird's eye view. The student did not bring in a kayak. That was from the internet, but he did bring in his raincoat and oar. And we took the picture, again, kind of looking down, and then the shark in the water is the portion that was drawn in charcoal.
So we all love Zentangles, right? Everybody's familiar with those. But how do you kind of tweak them so that they're a little more interesting and students are actually learning beyond just the line design aspect of that? Here, the students had to pick an object to interact with and kind of design that based on, so the idea here is geometric and organic, so they're kind of showing both. But what's really great about this too is that they're actually cutting themselves out and playing on the big piece of paper with composition. So it's really more about that piece and movement than it is about like line design, right? In this case, these are mixed media students where they do a gel transfer, so they take a photo of themselves or have another student take a photo. We Xerox copy those, do a gel medium transfer. You guys know what I'm talking about when I say that? Okay. And then just really playing with materials. It's kind of a great warm-up to starting the idea of mixed media. So they're using other materials that they're maybe not familiar with to create their artwork.
This is a project that I have never taught, but I really want to, so I still included it, right? So a band that a fan made this artwork of one of their players. And right, it's just drawing the negative, very straightforward. So I just love it because if you're going to teach these traditional skills about controlling value and light and shadow, drawing the negative takes away some of that fear about making it look just like the person of the original. And then also after that, oopsie, goodbye. Let's get back real quick. Janet?
So there's a way to kind of invert it to check it. Matt was talking to me about an app that is out there, but I know that there's also on your accessibility piece of your phone, you can go in there and invert the colors. So it's kind of a great way to check, and it's kind of surprising for the students too when they see it. They're like, oh, it does look like it's supposed to look. And in that same vein, we use that app or the accessibility feature on the phone a lot with handmade negatives. So these are traditional, used to practice for traditional darkroom photography. So the students aren't actually taking the photos. So in this case, this is my practice piece with my daughter when she was really little. And I just took that photo, slipped it inside a sheet of acetate, and then like one of those page protectors, right? And then I stipple the value that I see, and then make a print. So this becomes a negative, right? Or it's actually a positive. I put in the photo paper, expose it, that becomes the negative, and then we do a reversal of that to make the positive image right here. So there's 2 ways to go about it. That's what our students here did. But then later on, I kind of developed like, oh, that's not actually a negative then, right? So I had students playing with lighting, and they had to take photos of each other, so then they're learning about lighting. But then also, in this case, the students actually did the negative values on the acetate and then used their phone accessibility to check it. Then when they made the print, that was the positive print immediately. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think Janet started this when she was still teaching at Kenwood, and so since then I've had my drawing students do it where we just collaborate with the AP Photo students. So those AP Photo students get signed out for a couple days, and they just are in the dark room kind of training us on how to expose film properly. And it's really nice just to have that physical print in your hand when you're done, as opposed to ink on paper. So working with stamps for portraits, we look at a lot of artists who make portraits using printing methods. So in this case, students could choose any stamp they wanted. It could be handmade, it could be store-bought, of course it could be fingerprints, but it somehow had to connect in meaning to the portrait that they were doing, right? So this portrait, if you zoom in, right, it's all done with rubber stamps. It's a long process, which some of them struggle with, but it also removes some of the pressure. You just kind of come in, you grab your stamp, you can use different amounts of ink or pressure to get different values. So of course they sort of look a little bit like more traditional mixed media portraits, but when you're up close, you can see all those moments. So the one on the bottom was a portrait of the student's father, and he handmade out of linoleum, a couple different stamps to get those different textures there. Also embroidered portraits. Is Alicia Oxford? Hi. My mentor from when I was at Boston University and superstar teacher, Alicia and I, have been talking about this for a couple of years, and I really loved it. I tried it for the first time this year. My advanced class, we started with embroidered portraits, which some of them were not happy with. Right off the bat, it's like, we didn't have the needle threaders, and everyone was stressed, and there was no AC in our school, and it was like 90 degrees. So it was like a rough start, but I really love this idea of drawing with thread, right? That's sort of at the core of this. So they could do a traditional portrait or a symbolic self-portrait.
So along the same vein, again, we've got some photo materials. This is like cyanotype, so light-sensitive paint. We painted on muslin and then printed out the inverse of an image on an acetate and brought it out into our courtyard to make the prints. This is my example that I did to show the students, but then these are how they turned out, right? Some of them didn't turn out at all, and they were terrible, or the ink started kind of running, or it started changing and fading over time. So we actually changed some of their drawings into iron-on transfers, and then did that onto the canvas or to the muslin, and then stitched on that with thread. Inside Out portraits were really inspired by the artist JR, and I highly suggest you go check him out if you don't know who he is. But these are taking, instead of doing the full face portrait, just taking a section to kind of take that pressure off of their eyes, and then using value in the background, using text to really explain what's going on the inside of the student. Then taking that another way further, we Xerox copied them, turned them into packing tape transfers. You know what I'm talking about with that? Yeah. Okay, so packing tape, and then when you get it wet, you can peel the paper off, and then whatever was white is now see-through. Then using contact paper, clear contact paper, attaching them temporarily onto the windows around the school. In our case, I tried to do it around the main office, so the principal had to see them. But the idea is really, you're just looking through somebody else's eyes, right?
Sorry, can you say the packing tape process?
Yeah, so basically you use Xerox copy. It can't be a laser, it has to be a Xerox copy. And then you put packing tape on it, rub it, burnish it really well, stick it in water for a couple minutes, and then you just sit and rub the paper off. It kind of disintegrates, and it copies the ink onto the packing tape. And then I trim those and use contact paper to kind of adhere them temporarily.
Who was the artist that inspired that?
JR.
JR.
Yeah, I think he's French. He's done some pretty amazing installations.
I sort of don't like him personally.
That's all right.
Cocky, but the students love him. It's good. I just like I've seen that video a few times now. I'm like, all right, JR, calm down.
Oh, go back.
Yep, right, didn't do that one.
All right. So these are collage color scheme selfies. Obviously, I like to say selfie a lot. Students love this selfie. So these are students taking photos of themselves playing with lighting, then printing those out, grid transferring them onto a larger piece of paper so they're understanding that scale, playing with tints and shades with one acrylic color so that they're not playing too much and they can really understand it, and then using value in the background in any way they see fit with graphite. Exquisite Corpstrates. That was Matt's last minute name. It was hard to say. Okay, so these, I got really bored with always having my students in doing portraits. And so I started looking up different ways to do portraits, and I found this artist a photographer who does a lot of these exquisite corpse type pieces. So this is an example of one of my students' traditional prints from their role.
And yeah, we've done this just with apps, right? So this is just like a phone collage app. So like a one-day thing in like a level 1 class. So you can do full body, but also you can do the face in different arrangements like that. I just realized that this little nose here is my current senior AP student when she was in 7th grade. I'm gonna show her that. All right. Also, if you've never never done live paintings, like this has really been a big selling point for recruiting students to join AP Drawing. During our Arts Week, right, they go out in the halls and they have all day, or like about 5 periods, to make a piece from start to finish. So of course, during the passing periods, all the students are walking around and seeing their progress. And it's something they really look forward to. We usually do this after AP is done, and students are like, oh, I wish I could use this for my breath piece. But you can see in the top left, we have one student digitally drawing. We just haul out a projector to the hallway. On the bottom, you can see the student working the portrait, and that's the finished portrait on the right. And on the far right, a student who's more interested in illustration, he just kind of had this ongoing role in the hallway and just kept going and going and going. And that was the final product there.
You know, our school does a lot of this kind of stuff too during our art weeks, where we're showing off the kids working. But what I really like about Matt's is that they literally are completing that artwork within a time frame. So it's like that 5-hour period that they're called out. They're start and finish, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, this was just sort of a day of experimentation, but I enjoy doing this now. We were trying to find other ways to exhibit your artwork, either for your digital portfolio or just live. And the idea here was, what if we projected our artwork onto ourselves? So either using white clothes or white sheets, find a way to project your, in this case, a painting, so that you can see a couple versions of the same painting there by a student. Here you can kind of see them setting up with the projector. This student projected a self-portrait on her face. So like her eyes are closed, right? Those eyes are the projected painting, if that makes sense. And then we played with like, oh, project his face on my face and see what our future baby would look like. That kind of very surreal and creepy. I love this one. This actually ended up being a block print, but they took just the original ink sketch and projected it, and they kind of arranged, the artist paired up with another student for these two wires connected. Okay, color theory. I know, I'm going too fast there.
That's all right. Color theory. So traditionally we do our color wheels, right? And then that's kind of for mixing paint and then kind of moving on to the actual artwork or project.
Right. So when we're talking about mixing a particular color, something very specific, this Palette Thief Portrait project, I mean, at the end of the day, it is, again, a transparency drawing over a really loose, rough kind of color underpainting. But what I like about this lesson is where that color comes from. We sort of steal it from other sources. So the way this starts is we practice finding palettes that we like, whether they're from a website, a piece of artwork, something in your bag, and trying to match that color palette exactly using just primary colors and color mixing theory. So here in the bottom left, you can see the student found this art poster from our classroom, and they tried to mix that palette to create that loose underpainting. And then after, we go ahead and put the transparency drawing back on top. So you get this very loose, kind of low-risk gestural portrait, but it also has this history embedded where the palette was taken from something else. Of course, camouflage, always great for teaching color theory. We've done a lot of variations on this. So in this case, right, camouflage your hand into a famous artwork. Camouflage your body. This was from an installation in our school. And again, the idea is trying to find subtleties in color to trick the eye. We were looking at Lou Bolin for that one. On the far right, there's a stool that's been camouflaged. You can kind of see the legs pretty clearly, right, this guy here. So it was a white stool, but they painted that black line, that chunk of the purple 3. So when you see it from the right angle, it's camouflage. We sort of did, do you know Indiana Jones and Last Crusade? It's like you see the invisible bridge and then they move it.
Mm-hmm.
So we sort of did a video like that. It was fun. Okay. All right. Right, Alexa Mead and style, so the opposite, trying to make a human look like a painting. We talk a lot about what are sometimes considered like bad painting techniques if you're shooting for realism, so things like harsh outlines, not a lot of value change, that sort of thing, to try and make a real person look as much as possible like a 2D painting. And they work in groups of 2 over a couple days, and so they can kind of work on the background part is also painted as well. These students tried to do a still life, so painting on real objects, attempting to make them look like a flat graphic painting.
Oh, look at that. We are right on time.
It's literally 3:25. But it's not, well, I guess so. We're not past it, so I guess
Just
we
keep
just
going.
All right.
All right.
I think we're going to finish.
All right, so scheme pillows. So I love love to incorporate some sewing techniques into my classroom. And so students got to pick out their own color scheme that they were interested in creating, and then they made like little mini pillows from that. And then it was like donated materials. The kids brought in old clothing, things like that, to cut up and create. Take home and snuggle on.
So 3D color wheel is always fun to do. One thing we like to do is before we assemble a color wheel, which of course you can keep expanding on over time, right? Students come in and they paint the objects. We do these color family portraits first, where you have to assemble a scene with like a quirky comment about that color scheme, right? So like warm colors, this is smoking hot, right? Or okay, so we just make these little portraits and then we can print them for like their notes in their sketchbook. You can do this like in level 1 or a level 1 drawing class as well. All right, so still life. Again, maybe you think about setting up a bunch of objects in the center of the room and everyone draws them for 2 weeks, trying to find ways to sort of play with that idea. So this was essentially, I came across some Plasti-Dip, which is not safe for schools. But if you dip stuff in it, it just becomes rubberized. And then we had black and white. So this is sort of a challenge. This is my drawing students. We had talked about composition. Using only black and white to create either a still life or a larger photo documented project based on this Plasti-Dip. So we had gloves and all that. We dipped, in this case, popcorn, so they became black rubber popcorn. And these are some of the photos that they made. Again, this is just sort of in our classroom, you know, putting a sheet on the ground, that sort of a thing.
You guys know what Plasti-Dip is?
It's like, a lot of times if you have like a metal tool, you might dip it in there and then that way the handles will become rubberized, right? But it dries as rubber. But if you don't want that, you can do spray paint, which is slightly less toxic than in the classroom. Not really. Here they dipped fruit, and then they sort of did this half and half thing.
All right, so teaching kids how to use the scanner, this is always a fun one, in partners to do a diptych. So on the top, we've got the summer and winter diptych, and then at the bottom, the kids wanted to play a little bit with Photoshop as well, and so then they can kind of colorize that to tell their story.
You can also do kinetic scanography where you're moving the objects as the scanner moves. So the blue with that little white sharp was just two blue Post-it notes, and you move them as the scanner bed moves, right? Or you can stretch objects as well. Stencils.
Enough said.
There we go. Okay. I usually start or end the year with something t-shirt related, but one of the projects is working with bleach, right? So if you're not familiar, if you use freezer paper, the stuff that's like shiny on one side and or matte on the other, it's really great for this. You cut out your stencils, and when you iron it, it keeps like a really nice clean line. You spray bleach, again toxic, we're working on it, but you can do the positive or the negative, and it's kind of like a one-shot attempt, but you get really cool results from it.
So Matt and I do a lot of sketchbooks in our classrooms, and we want to make sure that students take ownership of them, so we do a lot of cover artwork for them. And in a level 1, it's a really great way to kind of loosen them up with learning different materials, collage or watercolor or whatever you got going on, and then having them take a photo and making a little stencil and spray painting them again outside in the nice weather. But then that way we laminate those onto their sketchbooks, and then that's theirs.
So you can use stencils for grass drawings. In this case, it's text, but you could do this as like a grid transfer where each square becomes one of these boxes. But basically, you fill a container, when we line with plastic, fill it with soil, and you use stencils to control where the grass grows. There's definitely some trial and error here if you try this.
And I would just like to say that Matt at this time was like, hey, can I borrow your room for this? Because you've got really good lighting. And I'm pretty sure he just like pawned it off because we were the ones watering it every
This is
day
true.
then. So just,
For one day, we like made some stencils and then dropped off these boxes for like 2 weeks, right? But you can, right, the grass will grow. And then one tip, if you try this, if the contrast isn't great, use the red mulch and you'll get better contrast. So we add the mulch at the end to kind of clean it up. All right, so book arts, this is more about tweaking really almost any artwork and just thinking about can you turn it into a book that's more collaborative. So grade one's coloring books. We had our students create these illustrations. There were 3 different book themes they could choose from. So the first was like traditional relaxation. The second was protest. And then the third was creativity or invention. But we started the unit talking about, and 2 years ago at least it was, the #1 selling book on Amazon was an adult coloring book. And so we sort of talk about the stigmas of coloring, but also some of the research about how it can be very therapeutic for mental health disorders. So that kind of starts the conversation, and they work on this illustration. And of course, when it's done, we print them on 11 by 17, and they bind the book. Question?
Can you say those 3 again, please?
The themes, I was relaxation, protest, and creativity or invention.
And then in the same vein, kids learning how to use Illustrator, right? So lines and paths and things like that, placing an image and then kind of tracing that. So of course, it's a really great way to teach them Illustrator because Illustrator is really hard. At least I think so. And so, yeah, copyrighted imagery, okay, but the kids get to pick their themes and then make their little coloring books. But then in this case, these students decided to do their own imagery. So they just scanned in their drawing and then placed that and drew over that with Illustrator. It's kind of fun too, and I didn't have an example of this, but they can also like fill in then different colors. So then they have like their artwork, but then they also have like a digital artwork, but then they also have the coloring book that you can hand do.
All right, so working with the how-to prompt to make comic books. So this is something we talk about. There's lots of ways you can approach the how-to prompt. It could be something silly, like make your farts smell like baked beans. Something arbitrary or surreal, how to shake a hand. Something serious or relevant to contemporary issues, how to be a white cop. And then from there, we've done it in 2 versions. We've bound these as a single page of a book where, again, everyone gets the full comic book. Or we've done zines. So like that how to make ramen that we finished this like a couple weeks ago. I hadn't done this project in a few years, but everyone made zines, and of course we exchanged those at the end. Unheard heroes. So the idea of taking a portrait of a hero, but focusing on someone who maybe doesn't get a lot of attention. So maybe you like really respect Obama, but a lot of people do. So trying to find someone that's maybe less well known that you either know or admire. So these are really just ink-based portraits, but again, we scan them and print them into a collaborative book. And the first page shows the student, the person, and then they have a quote from their unheard hero underneath it. And then we sort of sign it like printmaking style as an edition as well. Yeah, so right, you might be familiar with, there's like a Book of Secrets culture, there's like a website out there, and people can anonymously post secrets that are either funny or serious.
So in this case, the prompt for our students was write down a secret, and then you put it into a hat basically, and then the kids pull those secrets and they have to illustrate that. Again, these are like quick little sketches and things like that. Packing tape transfers, love the packing tape transfers part. But you can see, again, some of them are kind of more serious, like I might be a father, or I have a miserable life even when people think I have it good. I have it good. But to also like, I steal gum, or I don't like tomatoes, or I stole money from my mom, which I think we all have. Okay.
Do be careful though, because students might write things that are really heavy or even inappropriate, so you have to discuss those guidelines, or say, maybe you can write what you want, but we might not be able to turn that into an illustration. Okay, so we wanted to talk about a couple of tweaks on field trips. I have an example here from a trip with my drawing students to the Garfield Park Conservatory. Is anybody here from Chicago? Yeah. All right. So that is my favorite place in Chicago. It's free, although you should still donate. And it's basically, it's a bunch of glass buildings with a bunch of plants, right? So we go there for a day of drawing. But I have a few suggestions for things to add to any field trip. So you can kind of see the conservatory with the student drawing there. One thing we start with before we leave is I printed a bunch of quotes, either related to nature or art, and they had to choose a quote that kind of lifts their spirit, and they had to write it somewhere on like their arms or their face or their body, so with Sharpie, right? So that the whole day they have this quote. I was telling Janet, it's very strange, just 2 days ago, one of my students was like, remember that quote? Like, I'm gonna get a tattoo of that. And I was like, first of all, which quote are you talking about? Like, who was the person that was quoted? She's like, I don't know, but I really liked it. And I was like, don't get a tattoo. You're not ready for this. So writing quotes on themselves, give them extra credit for costumes, right? We're going to the jungle, so we had sort of camo. Okay.
That's appropriate. And then we also go to the Garfield Conservatory, but we do things like go to our state park. There's some canyons and nature, and who doesn't love that, right? But a lot of times the kids are just not used to really spending time to observe and look for things. So I do this with my upper levels, and I give them a ton of different prompts on a slides presentation, and just kind of get them thinking outside the box. But a lot of times they still kind of get stuck in the observation mode because they don't really know how to slow down. So I give them a scavenger hunt as well, and they're like really heady prompts, and the kids are always like, I don't know what to do for them. Like, just walk around and figure it out. And so then they find images that kind of relate to that. And it just, like I said, it just takes them to slow down a little bit.
Also, just a suggestion is always ask for stuff wherever you go. So the conservatory, I usually ask for some like scraps that are cut. And the first time I went there, kind of like, yeah, we don't really do that. And they gave us some like garbage plants. But this last time, they gave us like a ton of these huge like fronds that they had just cut down. And so the kids, I took them on the bus and they walked around the school with them. And we had a couple like leftover periods at the end of the day. So we did some like quick and dirty printmaking. Like that's actually like 36 by 48 or something, like really large scale. So we just like slapped some paint on there and printed them. So always ask for stuff because you never know what they're going to give you. Okay, we're getting to I think I got 2 more categories. Are you guys doing okay?
Yeah. All right.
Appreciate it. Appreciate your patience. Here we go. All right, so grid transfer. Obviously, the benefit of grid transfer is, if you've got a huge classroom with 40 students, here's one opportunity where you can, utilize that workforce to make something big and quick. So in this case, we took some textbooks that were going to be thrown out from a history teacher, and they're perfect because each textbook is like a perfect grid-ish, right? It's a rectangle, and they painted, 1 to 2 books each. And this is for Black History Month, so they voted on, like someone we want to honor, an artist or musician. Can you tell who that is? Okay. We did a little bit of research, and they kind of promoted it as an event. We like unveiled it. They had promotional flyers on their back and like walked around school. Of course, just working large in general. So same thing, just charcoal on paper, and assembling it doesn't require as much heavy lifting for materials. Similarly, we made some large-scale drawings where students chose an artist to inspire it. So they've just been talking a lot about Kehinde Wiley because of the Obama portraits. So they used some of those components, right, appropriating a pose from an old painting, using pattern, and as a class kind of made some proposals, and then we photographed the students. They photoshopped that for the final image, and then that led into this grid transfer drawing, which is charcoal and pastel. This one's nice too, because for the students who are like struggling or really don't, have like a little bit of that fear of drawing realistically, of course they can work on the pattern stuff too.
All right, so thank you so much to Frank Modest, who's up in front recording for us. His wife is the one I work with, and she does drawing and painting classes at our school. And in her painting 1 classes to teach them how to mix colors, they really focus on little squares of canvas. And what I love about these is that not only are they obviously quite beautiful, but she takes them and then the kids like paste them onto a big piece of plywood. I think it's like a 4x6 or something like that. And then we actually attach these to our wall in our school. And so every semester, because we're on semesters, every semester we get a new mural that's put up around the school, and the school loves it, and we love it. The other thing I wanted to say about that, which is so nice, is that a lot of times our work tends to be pretty disposable, right? Like our grid transfers, the books, we might recycle those into other things. And in this case, it's kind of like more of a permanent piece, and the students feel ownership over that too.
Right, sidewalks obviously are a natural grid, so you could utilize those for grid transfer technique as well. I've shared this lesson before, and of course, the minute we finished, it rained and was completely destroyed. But we had a time-lapse video of them making it, which is sort of nice. All right, last, using some of the, AR, of course, is entering pop culture and our students' lives in the art classroom as well. So using some of these free apps to put a twist on maybe an existing lesson. There's a good one called Ink Hunter, right? It takes a simple, any illustration or drawing that you take a photo of, and it will remove the white space and make it clear, and it will, live transfer it to your arm, right? You just make a little like smiley face symbol, and it will find that. And it doesn't record video, but again, it will kind of live interact as you're looking through the phone. Also, again, for students who are always getting terrible tattoos, be like, try it out for a couple weeks first. Like, you're gonna regret this in 10 years. So that's a great one. It's called Ink Hunter. One of my colleagues, student teachers from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, did a project with a digital imaging class using the HP Reveal app. Oop, is the video not there? What's going on? Interesting. There it goes. So similarly, you set up kind of a target to find on a space in advance, and you can project your image as like a mural. The website is like a little clunky and strange, but it does work. And I had a drawing student do the same thing with a digital drawing that she had made, so you can, again, have it as a video or a photo for AR murals. I don't have the exact app that I use for this, but there's a bunch of like Make Your Photo Talk apps. And they're really great. I don't know if we'll hear the audio here, but you can have, if your drawing came to life, it can speak. Yeah, thank you so much for putting it together. I feel alive. We also have students critique, like have the drawing critique itself. I really worked hard at my texture, but my contrast, but whatever.
All right, so lastly, taking our traditional drawing and kind of tweaking it, kind of extending the lesson, right? So teaching them how to do illustrative texture, and then I was like, well, let's make some really cool sculptures out of these. So we did that out of paper mache. We actually tried to do a little of I can't think of the word.
Animation.
Thank you, animation, stop motion animation. And we ran out of time, unfortunately. But we also love, again, this is called Chatterpix. I don't even know if it still exists. It's been a while, but I'm sure there's a bunch out there. So this is my example one that I played with. You can see that's my example sculpture too, so that the kids could see all of that. That's weird. That's one of my students, yeah. I love it.
Let's see.
Let's see if we can get it. Yeah. I was like, this precious, I did it. Yeah, that was my precious moment from my 2-year-old at the time. Yeah. There it is.
All right. Thank you for staying again. If you sign that email list, or if you even just email us if you didn't get a chance to.
Wait. Don't go yet. Don't move.
Where's the?
I don't know. Who's got our email list? It's over that way.
So if you can wait, or talk to us, or again, if you email either of us and just say, please add us, we will. We'll send you the PowerPoint. I also...
No.
Yeah.
We have some difficulties with that in the past, so we just want to kind of keep it clean and easy for you guys. Yeah.
Thank you for the suggestion, though.
Yeah.
Also, one last thing. If you guys have tweaks to lessons that you've done, if you want us to share that when you email us with either description or photos, when we send out this presentation, we can also add yours if you're interested. Okay?
And last shameless plug is that I'll be presenting again tomorrow at 11 about creating a studio environment, using choice in your classroom to create that environment. And then Matt, myself, and Janelle, who did the his art history composite murals, we're going to be talking about Little Fish, Big Pond, kind of ways to get a job, basically, right? Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. Or student teachers, monitors, that kind of stuff. So, oh, lastly, if anybody wants us to come and talk at your school for a PD, because we're always hungry for PD, right? Like actual, authentic PD that helps us, you can also contact us as well. We'd be happy to come out.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.